Would everyone please be seated? Sit down. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to our session on transformative partnerships. It's great to be here. I'm Helen Rhodes, a member of the class of 2017, and it's been wonderful reconnecting with my classmates and meeting others from the other classes as well as outside the program. And thank you, New England, for some pretty weather. I've been charged with introducing our presenter this morning, Robert Eubanks. Robert is from one of my favorite places, Hawaii. And you have to ask, why would anyone from Hawaii come to New England this time of the year? Robert is in the class of 2019, and one of his classmates said, "There are no simple solutions to complex problems, but we have to show up for the complex ones and be a part of the movement that is the change this country needs." Robert shows up because he is one of those computer scientists who loves the challenge of complex problems. Now, he would be much more comfortable giving this talk in an aloha shirt, shorts, and being barefoot. But to honor New England traditions, he is wearing a blazer, a tie, dress slacks and shoes, and a nice dress shirt. This is also so he can keep warm. Hawaiian culture is big on doing things with aloha, doing things with love. To share a little aloha, Robert has provided everyone with macadamia nut treats for you to share with each other during your group discussions. So after his presentation, everyone make sure they're at the table assigned to them. There are lists on the center of the tables, and we will have about a 30-minute breakout session to discuss the tactics he will discuss that are important when forming transformative partnerships. Thank you.
Before coming, I was having lunch with James Chen. He's in the class of 2015. I told him that I was going to give a talk on transformative partnerships, and he rolls his eyes big and slow. Because I work for the health plan, and he has to negotiate with us, and he can't imagine how we could be transformative or creative, yeah? And so I said, so he tells me I have a really difficult challenge. So we'll see how I do. So in this is a challenge for me because like the caterpillar, we all need to transform to create something more beautiful. For myself, I'm an introvert who is a little bit of geeky computer science. I'm trying to struggle free from my comfortable cocoon and do something different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share what I learned through my struggles. To start off with, I'm just going to remind us all why transformative partnerships are important. You know, our health and healthcare systems fall short in many ways. Our families and our friends and our neighbors deserve better. And the only way that we can achieve better for our friends, families, and neighbors is if we work together to try to do something different. So why are transformative partnerships so difficult? Transformation always involves loss, significant loss, painful loss. And I think we've seen that in many of the sessions here. And what we've seen is people are pretty keen on avoiding loss. GM plant in the United Auto Worker plant had terrible workers. And this is a case that many of us went through in the program. I think we did this in the operations class. And then when GM closed the plant, Toyota agreed to take it over and reopen it as the NUMMI plant. And so Toyota agreed to hire the union members that were in the plant previously. And these union members, they were going to hire few of them, so a lot of their cohort was no longer going to be there. And they were going to experience loss. They're going to experience loss of seniority, a loss of pride, the need to relearn their job, and a loss of really reframing their role. They were no longer going to be able to have the joy of being the rebel, giving it to the man, being able to do rebellious drinking on the job, and be able to sabotage cars. All those are things that they weren't going to be able to do anymore. And so how did Toyota keep the union workers from really feeling a great sense of loss that would undermine the change? What they did is they brought all those workers to Toyota City in Japan. What they did there is they experienced things they didn't experience at GM. They experienced teamwork, quality before production, positive role models, opportunities to practice these new behaviors. And they really developed a positive sense of competition. They realized how well Toyota did what Toyota does. And if they were going to build cars in America that were going to compete with Toyota, they had to be different. You know, they developed a greater pride, and they really focused on the gains they were going to get becoming part of Toyota versus the losses of no longer being part of GM. And from day one, they produced great products with quality matching Toyota, and they had great pride. And this worked really well for the Japanese. This was the first factory they had in the US, and since then they've opened a number of factories because they figured based on this experience they could make any factory work. You know, GM tried to transform their Van Nuys plant next. But the problem is the UAW people just focused on what they were going to lose. The management people focused on what they were going to lose. And the outcome is that the Van Nuys plant shut down. Where does the GM story go? Well, GM struggled with this issue of dealing with losses for decades. And GM eventually went bankrupt and then came back with support from the federal government. You know, this issue of processing loss is huge. We saw it whenever we went out and did something, and I'll talk about some specific projects, that whenever a physician feels lost, whenever everyone feels lost, I would get people who would monopolize my meetings, talk over me, respond in a passive-aggressive fashion. And whenever you see this behavior, you fail to anticipate some loss that they were going to experience. And the more that we can anticipate loss, the better we did. So I was involved in 2 transformative partnerships. The first was a statewide campaign to promote video decision aids for end-of-life care, to help people decide what mattered most to them when they were seriously ill. So I went to every hospital, every critical access hospital, every hospice, every skilled nursing facility in the state multiple times to promote this as a process improvement activity. I went into community settings, I taught classes in churches, and I worked with primary care physicians. The second project was a home-based palliative care project. And what we did is we built up a home-based palliative care network to provide benefits to people who had advanced cancer, advanced heart failure, advanced COPD, and liver failure. So we worked with every hospice in the state to help them develop a separate service line. We worked with oncologists, cardiologists, pulmonologists, and the liver center, and with hospitals to work on referral processes so people could get this palliative care while receiving curative treatment. And so these were the 2 projects. And to set the stage for my learning, I really didn't know anything about palliative care or advanced care planning or shared decision making, other than I thought they were really good ideas at the beginning. So I was at a point where I could, in a position to learn a lot. At the same time, the health plan I worked for, a nonprofit health plan, it was losing a lot of money. And so 1 year into our project, we sort of lost our budget, and we didn't have any money to be able to apply the resources that we wanted. So I had really one clear idea at this point. That is that if I was going to be successful, I needed to get people in the community to really volunteer. They needed to be my hands and feet. They needed to be the workforce that was going to make things happen. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you what did I learn in trying to create partnerships that result in a volunteer workforce to make things happen. So I sort of reflected backwards. This isn't what I started out with. This is what I learned along the way and came up with these 4 tactics. The first was to invest in relationships before partnering, discovering a compelling story, aligning leadership priorities, and exercising compassion and resilience. Then I'll talk about the why and how of these for our efforts. The first is to invest in relationships before partnering. And just to give you a simple example that's a little bit unrelated to those efforts, one of the things that we did as a health plan is we sponsored a collaborative of all of the hospital CMOs. So they met 6 times a year for the last 5 years. All we did was fund the meeting, and we had no involvement in the agenda. Through this process, they shared their stories and challenges, and they developed strong familiarity. Late last year, we approached one of the CMOs and said, hey, we would like to sponsor a patient safety organization if the community wants to start one. And so he was excited about the idea. because he felt he knew his other chief medical officers well enough that he would be able to rally them around pursuing this initiative. And so in February, we presented this idea to them, and they're pretty excited about coming up with a proposal to do something in 2018. So who is this? Do we recognize this guy? LBJ. What was his reputation as a leader? Yeah, I mean, what I remember him for is the Vietnam War. So I went to his presidential library last December, and you know, as you walk around his library, you can really relive the 60s. It's just really amazing. And with apologies for all of you who are too young to relive the 60s, it won't be the same experience. For me, it actually brought me to tears because I could remember the 60s. What I did not know about Johnson, because all I could remember was the war protests, was he had a vision for a great society to end poverty and racial injustice. And his administration has probably passed more legislation to advance that great society than any before or since. So civil rights legislation was a Johnson achievement. Immigration reform, environmental protection, education programs from preschool to college. And then there's a couple of programs that you might be familiar with called Medicare and Medicaid. These are all things that Johnson achieved in 4 years. So how did he do this? What is he doing in this picture here? He's listening. And what you take away when you visit the presidential library, he was a master of knowing people, their needs, their aspirations, their emotions, and their vulnerabilities. He used this knowledge to forge together and to rally people to achieve results. He was a master of finding common ground that leads to action and change. You know, if we're going to create a better healthcare system, we need more leaders like LBJ who become masters of knowing people and create common ground. So how did we start to do this? Well, you know, I'm a real introvert, so I really needed help here. And so as a computer science guy, I liked people who could give us algorithms. So how do you create authentic and productive relationships? Marshall Gans had a process that he used in his creating social movements. And so I found this sort of appealing to me because it helped me think about these relationships in an authentic and productive way. First, to start a relationship, you need to capture someone's attention. And so lots of times what we would do is we would get introductions from other people involved in palliative care, end-of-life care, introductions from one facility to the next. Second, we would try to establish a common interest. We would ask them, hey, we're about improving outcomes for the seriously ill. Can you tell us about your perspective? We try to get people to share their story. We tried to learn from the choices that they made, the challenges they faced, so we could understand what mattered most to them. Fourth, as a result of those explorations, then we would work on exchanges. What could we do to advance the relationship? And we would come back to visit multiple times. And then we would try to see if there's a basis for commitment. And a lot of times through this exchange process, people would tell us, oh, they're busy, or they'd even tell us no. But we were kind of resilient, and we just translated that into a not yet. And so we would come back every 3 to 6 months until people would say, okay, now I'm ready, let's do it. So by recruiting volunteers, in fact, over a three-year period, we were able to contribute several hundred people to join us in this effort. Now that we had people volunteering, how did we actually start working together? How did we find common actionable ground? At this stage, the people at the table that have bought into the idea may be committed to us, but they may not know how to get their organization on board. And so this is a process we use to try to find ideas to rally organizations to work together. And so this is called the strategic doing process. It was developed at Purdue. And this process asks 4 questions. We'll just go through each of them briefly. What could we do together? What are our strengths, our assets? What are our new things that we could accomplish by configuring what we have together in new ways? Second, then we ask, well, of all these ideas, what should we do? What's 1 or 2 things for which we could create an emotionally engaging story that produces a strategic outcome that would enlist others? And then third, we try to say, how do we get our organizations committed to doing these ideas? What's the process for committing to action? And then fourth, What do we learn? And we learn by doing together and then reflecting upon that. And so we ask ourselves the question, how do we learn together? So we use this process at different levels. So one of the things that we observed in listening to people is that a lot of people like having these advanced care planning conversations and thinking about what matters most to them in their primary language. So we found people in the community that were willing to work with us to translate these video aids into 10 different languages. So if you're Marshallese, you could learn about what matters most to you in Marshallese, or Samoan, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, and so on. We also worked to bring different hospices together for our palliative care program to do process improvement across organizational boundaries, where we had people working together on similar processes. We partnered with churches to develop advanced care planning classes to do in a church setting. And then we also brought people together from hospitals and the hospices to look at how can palliative care reduce avoidable admissions. And we actually did quite well, and we'll share some data with you in the end. So this is how we started working together and building relationships. In the same time, we worked at trying to create a compelling story. And this guy out in front, that orange guy, is what I look like after a day at the beach without sunscreen. So we wanted to do is create a shared story. Start with our story, create a sense of urgency, and then create a story of us. And this is, again, Marshall Gann's process. And his story of self-structure has 3 pieces to it. What is the challenge that's important to us? Why do we feel this is important? What are the choices that we're making? Why are we making these choices? Where do we get hope to take action? What are the outcomes? How do those outcomes make us feel? What are the lessons we're learning from those outcomes? For telling our story, what we tried to do was create sort of emotional and intellectual transparency so people could see our values, so they could see why we've chosen the things that we're choosing, so they can see what to expect from us and what they can learn from us. And this is really important when you're coming to talk to a provider about as a health plan employee, because people have all kinds of preconceptions of why you're there and what matters to you. So telling our story well in a way that was engaging was really important. And what we tried to do then is to create a sense of urgency. What is the challenge that we can face together? What's the vision that we could achieve if we act together? We tried to have people share their stories and take their stories and weave them into a common weave so that my story and their story became our story. Their crisis and my crisis became our crisis. And so this story created shared values. The story of us created shared values to inspire action. And so we did this with every site that we went to. We asked people to share their stories, their patient stories, their family stories. And we use this to create the story of us. And so I'm just going to give you an example. This actually came, we were meeting in a hospital with some residents, and they were sharing about a patient that they were currently trying to care for. It was a 79-year-old Japanese woman. Let's call her Iris. This was her 4th hospitalization this year. She had liver failure. She's had liver failure for the past couple of years. Right now, she's delirious and unable to make decisions. The family looks at her delirium and says, oh, she's feeling better and she's looking better. Let's do everything. The residents are aghast because they think that she is dying and they want to get her out of the hospital into an ICU. But nothing happens, and no one asks Iris, what do you want? The challenge is Iris is dying. The choice was everyone chose not to talk to Iris about what matters most to her. The outcome is we don't know what matters to her. Well, and what will happen will be she'll die in an ICU, tethered to machines, an end that she most likely did not want. How do we do justice for Iris? How do we honor her wishes? Who would want to be in Iris's position? It's so sad that no one asked her what mattered most to her. Our families, friends, and neighbors, they deserve better. How do we help people understand what we mean by deserve better? So this is an article that's one of my favorite. It's The Bell Curve by Tolgawande, and it's about resisting being average. Well, so imagine that it's 1964, and imagine that you have a 2-year-old daughter with cystic fibrosis. Why might it be important to you at this point in history to resist being average when it comes to cystic fibrosis? And maybe you're not sure, but maybe I can show you some data points that help you. So in 1964, the life expectancy for cystic fibrosis was 3 years if you were at an average center and 21 years if you were at the top center. So what might 18 years of your daughter's life mean to you? How might you feel about resisting being average at this point? So when this data was released to the facilities, what do you think happened? Well, people got motivated about resisting being average. They really worked together in benchmarking themselves, and the average center went up from 3 years to 30 years. So your daughter's now 30 years old. Is it still important to resist being average? Well, you probably need another point of data. So the top center of the average life expectancy was 46 years, I'm sorry, and they actually had some patients that lived into their 60s. So if you're a doctor at an average center, what do you tell your patients? What do you feel about resisting being average? And so it's important to develop these messages and to communicate to people that resisting being average is important. And here's how we did it for our advanced care planning project. So we used the Dartmouth Atlas, and this was one of the slides that we used at the very beginning. The Dartmouth Atlas allows you to compare data at different levels. And so what we did is we looked at things at a state level, and we ranked Hawaii as a state. And Hawaii is ranked from the third from the bottom for hospital days in the last 6 months of life. They're the second from the bottom in terms of deaths in the hospital. And we can give a shout out and a mahalo thank you to New York, because New York saved us from being the 51st in terms of having the most people die in a hospital. Do our loved ones want to spend an extra 6 days in the hospital at their end of life? Do they want to spend an extra 3 days in the ICU? Do they want to double their odds of dying in a hospital? Do our loved ones really deserve some of the worst end-of-life outcomes in the country? Hawaii has a strong sense of place. We have a strong sense that we owe something better to our families, our friends, and our neighbors. Hawaii is a community with 1 degree of separation. One of my wife's students' mothers was in the hospital, and it so happens that the mother, her husband, works with me, and that the oncologist that's taking care of the mother took care of my sister-in-law. It's a place where everyone is family and everyone feels a sense of connection. So we would ask people, is now the time we want to do something different for our families and friends and neighbors? Will you join us in making something different for our loved ones? Will you volunteer to make this a better place for our elders? So at this point in our conversation, a lot of times we had people pretty energized. And when we said, okay, how do we align leadership to make the most of the energy that we've created? And so what we're going to share with you is some of the challenges of aligning leadership and then how to address them. So, elephants are huge, and what we can learn from these blind men are huge. The blind man each reaches a different conclusion about the elephant in this picture. Each is partly right, but in reality, they're all wrong. In the same way, people can spiral into perplexing and emotionally charged disagreement, unable to see value beyond their own limited field. Team members often hold stereotyped views of their colleagues and their domains, and thus feel inhibited about directly addressing an issue. And this would come up a lot in what we did. This challenge is difficult to address, and it's particularly difficult for all of us in this room to address, because each of us in our own way is here because we're amazing, we're talented, there's special things about who we are. But really for us to learn from others and to learn from ordinary folks, we need to practice something called kenosis. Kenosis is the idea that we're going to go through a process of emptying from ourselves everything that makes us amazing. By emptying ourselves of everything that makes us amazing, now we can hear and listen without judgment. We can suspend judgment. We can be authentically curious. We can be so curious that we listen and struggle to understand and seek insight from unfamiliar perspectives wrapped in unfamiliar logic and unfamiliar language. And this is really important in partnerships. And so how would you as a leader take on this kind of a challenge? So what I'm going to do is share something from Amy Evanson. She developed this model of 4 leadership levers. It's about how can you remove barriers, how can you channel energy, how can you engage people's emotions to learn so that they can learn from each other, how can we create systems to support learning from each other. So we can review these 4 levers. First, it's about fostering an adaptable vision. As passionate as we were, we realized that we didn't have the whole story, and that we knew that people, when they joined our movement, would enrich our story and improve our vision. We also recognized that we wanted to have diverse participants. We wanted people from different cultural backgrounds to feel a part of what we were doing, so we wanted to be open to them shaping our ideas. And last, we knew we didn't have all the answers, that we knew we would learn something about our elders and about elder care in order to improve outcomes. So as a leader, we need to be able to explain the rationale for change, give people permission to talk about change, and create the involvement so all partners can come on board and own the change as we move forward. Second, as leaders, it's important to promote psychological safety. We really want to create an environment where we invite people to speak up, where we model the desired behaviors of being curious, of acknowledging uncertainty, and highlighting our own infallibility. And at times, this is really challenging, as we'll give another example in a minute. Pointing out that what we're doing is really an experiment, and that we're trying to create the expectation that we're taking small risks, we're doing small tests of change, helps to open up the conversation so people would approach their collaborators with a more open mind, with more curiosity and more willingness to work through conversations that might expose their ignorance. Third, we try to do things to share knowledge. From our point of view, sometimes things seem obvious, as things might seem obvious to you. The problem is not everyone had the data or the perspective that we did. So we sometimes create a misunderstanding and conflict that was totally unintentional. And so what we tried to do was get people to share their story. We try to share our story. How do we get to this point that we're at? What was the data? What were the experiences that shaped us? So we could create shared understanding. And this sometimes takes a lot of time and may even appear to be wasteful, but we felt it was essential to achieve the outcomes that we wanted to achieve. And then fourth, we promoted this iterative collaborative approach where we really want to support a test and learn approach. So when we went to every site that we went to, we just said, look, let's start small. Try with 5 patients. Use this survey instrument to ask them 5 questions to get their feedback so that we can understand what makes sense here. And what was really amazing is that they would get these patients to fill out the 5 questions, and patients would write comments on the form. These comments were just incredibly validating. We had people who had just no idea how much their patients appreciated having these conversations and being able to watch a video about what mattered most to them in their primary language. So for us to succeed as leaders, and we need to be flexible and open-minded, but we also need to have some fierce resolve to be able to stay the course and move in the direction forward. And so we use these levers all throughout our journey, some better than others, and more as we made progress. That this became a framework over time that really made sense to us. So if you ever felt like this guy feels in this picture, I probably don't need to tell you why compassion and resilience is so important. When we do transformation, it always involves loss for someone, and sometimes for everyone. And compassion and resilience are just essential responses to loss. So how can we put compassion into action? And why do we want to put compassion into action? Compassion makes others feel better. It gives energy and renewal to your efforts. Feeling compassion for one person will make you less vindictive towards others. And there's a lot of people, when you do these partnerships, that come from different points of view, that will find your buttons and push them. Employees who receive compassion in their workplace see themselves and their coworkers and organization in a more positive light. You'll want to expect others to feel distress. And people may feel distress for reasons totally unrelated. Their mother died, their father is seriously ill. You need to anticipate the need for compassion and be in a position to provide it. When you provide compassion for people who are suffering, it builds great mutual commitment, and we'll give you an illustration of that in a little bit. It's important to feel the distress of others. We had a nationally known palliative care physician who was really uncomfortable with the idea of video aids. It felt really impersonal to him, or to her, I'm sorry. But we kept, over time, giving gentle nudges, and eventually they started using the videos more and more. And what they learned is when they're not talking and the patient's watching the video, what they get is a rich stream of nonverbal communication from the patient and from the family, which became the starting points for having great and deeper conversations. So now they're comfortable, seeing these video aids as something that leads to a better conversation, and not something that makes them feel like they're inadequate and they can't tell the story themselves. Part of what you want to do is to avert distress that drives unproductive behaviors. And so I worked with a palliative care physician who was a chief resident when she was a resident and is still a chief resident today, 30 years later. So she had a challenging style, but she created all kinds of opportunity for me to anticipate and alleviate distress and build connection with people. And so we were an interesting duo at times. And we work together to keep moving forward. Sometimes you'll have people involved on your efforts that really the only productive response is to forgive them. I worked with someone who was just fantastic at advanced care planning. She was just marvelous in engaging in families. However, she had a really, really low tolerance for uncertainty. I invited her to an innovation work group meeting. We were trying to engage a new partner in this process. And the meeting was so uncertain for her that she just sort of halfway through the meeting sort of took it over with sort of a profane stream of negativity. Well, all innovation ended at that point. And so after the meeting, I met with her, and I really explained as compassionately as I could, hey, those actions weren't really helpful, but I forgive you. But let's reach agreement that you will not attend those meetings again, because that's just not your place. And so we're still friends today, and she still does a fantastic job, and she's a star contributor in her comfort zone for advanced care planning. It's important to encourage others to practice self-compassion. And as a leader, sometimes self-compassion is really the safest route. For the sake of time, I'm not going to tell you a funny story about what happened when I tried to not practice self-compassion and get compassion from a friend. But I'm told to stay on schedule, so we're going to skip past that little funny story. So our last topic here we're going to talk about is resilience. Resilience is essential. Michael Levitt, who was the three-time governor of Utah and was a cabinet secretary for Health and Human Services, he goes out and he talks about transformation in healthcare. And his message is that we're 25 years into a 40-year transformation. So it's really, this is going to be a long journey. There may be at least 15 years ahead of us. And so resilience is going to be important. This little picture comes from a primary school in England. And if you Google around about schools and resilience, for whatever reason in England, resilience is a huge learning objective for their primary schools. So they're teaching kids about keeping connected, challenging your own mindset, taking a moment, talking things over, getting active, making a difference, looking on the bright side. As a leader, you need to figure out what's your strategy for personal resilience. And for me, one of my favorite activities is to have a nice lunch. When you're partying with people who come from different backgrounds and who are experiencing loss and having trouble navigating change, a lot of times you can have some pretty emotionally draining meetings in the morning, and by lunchtime you're like, why am I still here? So I would have a nice lunch. I'd forgive the people who gave me a merciless, difficult time in the morning, and then I'd have some anticipatory compassion for the people who are going to come up in the afternoon. I ate my happy foods, but I can tell you it won't work if you want to drink your happy drinks. Okay, happy drinks at lunchtime won't always lead to more compassion in the afternoon. And the other thing I do for me is I run in the morning. I find when I run that I'm in more control of my emotions. My buttons are harder to find and to push. I'm more patient and more compassionate. I've also learned that it's great to look on the bright side and to see possibilities in difficult circumstances, because there's just going to be a lot of misunderstandings. We had a palliative physician who worked with us And he, for whatever reason, called me a benign robot. You know, when coming from a palliative physician, that's probably not a compliment, okay? But, you know, I'm like, well, hey, you know, I'm a fan of that Star Trek android figure called Commander Data. So, you know, maybe that's an example of a benign robot. Maybe he's a fan too. Probably not, but maybe. You know, is this an opportunity for growth? Well, I think I'm always looking for opportunities for growth. Maybe I can be more benign, and maybe he wants me to be less robotic. Or is this really about that I'm so different from him that I'm making him uncomfortable, and he's just telling me he's uncomfortable? Well, you know, maybe all these things are true, and maybe recognizing they're all true is sort of the best path for resilience. You know, maybe there's more than one way of seeing things, and that can move towards resilience. You will also want to plan for, like, team resilience. I worked on a team with people who were just great at antagonizing each other and just creating lots of frustration. So we had a novel thing that we tried. So we took them out to play par 3 golf. But the course we took them to was a terrible course. So that the course was so bad that it didn't matter how good of a golfer you were going to have a difficult time. And so in this process of the very anti-competitive nature of the golf course, allowed to build some mutual understanding and to release pent-up energy. So we've gone through these 4 tactics, and you might wonder, well, where did this go for your projects? So here's just a quick snapshot of each project. So our advanced care planning project, it made the very top of the front page of the Honolulu Star Advertiser. And the author of this article, Susan Asoyan, she was one of the 400 people I met. And her mother and my mother were going through serious illness at the same time. And so we developed a really good connection. She wrote a fantastic story. She advocated for her story as a reporter and got it at the top of the front page of the newspaper. And this was just really a great story for us as a health plan and as a community. And we were very gratified. You know, I could tell you more, but then we would go over time. But you can read more. So in the Journal of General Internal Medicine in May 2016, there was a paper published with Dr. Volandes and others that highlighted the results that we were able to achieve in the community of Hilo, Hawaii, and the Big Island, and working with Hilo Medical Center. Our other project, which is the home-based palliative care project, we called it supportive care to make it more comforting to oncologists, cardiologists, and others. We presented this poster board at the ASCO Pal-Onc conference in Boston, October 2015. And part of what we reported was we compared the end-of-life care for our cancer patients in our home-based palliative care program to Dartmouth Atlas cancer patient data. And we saw dramatic improvements in a number of measures. Some measures improved so much that they dropped to less than half of the national average. So we had a dramatic drop in percentage of patients dying in the hospital, a dramatic drop in percentage of patients hospitalized, and a dramatic drop in hospital days. The daughter of one of our patients, turns out that she was a gynec-onc surgeon, and she was a leader in the physician community. And she was so thankful for this program that she agreed to do a video for us. And so we spent a couple hours with her, and we edited it down to a 3-minute video. And it's just a fabulous story on why a daughter thought this was a great program for her mother. She was, as a leader in the community, she would meet with our CEO from time to time, and she would remind our CEO what a fabulous program this was. So it's really great to have people who can come out of nowhere and just be great partners. And she was really a fantastic support for us. And there's many other great stories we could share, but so that you guys have time to talk, let's just look back on what we've talked about. So there are 4 tactics, and we're going to want you to pick one of these and discuss in your group. It's about investing in relationships before partnering, discovering a compelling story, aligning leadership priorities, exercising resilience and compassion. You know, this is a nice picture of boats in our harbor. You know, and boats look good in a harbor, and it's a safe place for boats. But, you know, that's not what boats are for. And so for me, this was getting me out of my cocoon, getting me out of my safe place, and trying to, you know, be part of an effort to take on complex challenges. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to think about these complex challenges in a special place. So if you want a resilience and compassion opportunity, This is a physician conference. It's in Hawaii every year. I'm on the planning committee. This is the Manalani Fairmont Orchid. You know, and we think that, you know, you can envision transformative partnerships here like nowhere else in the world. This is really a blue ocean opportunity for you to think about partnerships. Okay, so we want you to be in your small groups, but before you go, let's just give you your instructions again, or maybe for the first time actually. So in your small group, we want you to pick one of those 4 tactics that you would like to work on. So what you'll have is a list of questions for each tactic. And so we'll want you to discuss those questions and report out. And we'll want you to apply them to a real partnership opportunity.